Welcome back. The South African Social Security Agency has blamed an administration issue for its failure to pay the R350 social relief of distress grant for the past 2 months. That means 10.6 million people who applied for the grant in April did not get anything from government. SASSA is now hoping to make payouts by mid-June. For more on this, let's speak to Senior Policy Specialist Neil Coleman. Neil, always good to have you on the channel. Good evening. So millions of people who are without any other income, because that's why you would qualify for the 350 grant, have been without any sort of relief from government for 2 months now, and you've described it as scandalous.
It is scandalous, Tembekile. I mean, just think that by the end of March this year, 11 million of the poorest South Africans were receiving the 350 rand grant. And suddenly in April, they just cut off. So, these are people who have zero income, who are unemployed, the poorest South Africans, who also have dependents. So if you take the 11 million plus 2 dependents each, you're talking about around 30 million people in South Africa are affected by this. And it was completely unnecessary. It was as a result of, bureaucratic obstructionism and complete, confusion as a result of Treasury in particular having placed an arbitrary budget cap on DSD. There's been a lot of shenanigans in an attempt to ensure that the numbers of people who qualify is reduced. Mm-hmm. So it was introduced a means testing system that you only qualify if you have less than 350 rand in your bank account. But none of the mechanisms were put in place to verify people's bank accounts. The Minister of Finance, according to a meeting that we had with Presidency and other officials, had delayed since the middle of April to approve a protocol to enter into discussions with the banks. And to this day, at the beginning of June, over 6 weeks later, that agreement with the banks still hasn't been finalized. So it was only after organizations had found that people were having lots of problems applying through the digital system, that they had to supply all sorts of new information, et cetera, we heard that a lot of people weren't able to apply, weren't getting the grants. It then became apparent that actually nobody had received the grant in the country at all. So this is a tantamount to 8 billion rand being taken from the poorest of the poor in this country. And Tembekile, heads must roll. Mm-hmm. There must be accountability for this.
But what are the chances that will happen?
Well, as civil society, we're going to push for that. We're pushing for a meeting with the President as a matter of urgency. We will be approaching the Presidency tomorrow for an urgent meeting with the President. It's clear that the departments themselves are completely unable to manage this thing. They're completely at odds. There's constant paralysis and bickering amongst the departments. And the poor are the sacrificial lambs as a result of this. Somebody must take accountability. And if it means that ministers' heads must roll, if it means that DG's heads must roll, then so be it. There must be accountability for this. I mean, it was shocking that in the President's debate in Parliament today, both the President and the opposition parties acted as if this wasn't an issue. It wasn't even discussed. It's unbelievable.
I want to pick up on the issue of the means test, because one of the issues with the means test, for example, is that as per the new requirements of this phase of the special relief grant, anyone who receives even financial support from a relative would not qualify for the 350 grant. How fair is that in a country with our socio-economic setting?
Totally unfair. I mean, we know that families support each other and that even those receiving the 350 grant use it to assist in buying food and so on and so forth. People don't operate as individuals, they operate as households and as extended families. So the situation before was that the food poverty line, which was then about 585, was used as the threshold. And this has been reduced to 350 rand because Treasury was not prepared to consider that more than the 10.5 million people that they budgeted for actually receive the grant. And our advice is that this is actually unlawful, because if you provide an entitlement in the law, then you have to provide the budget which allows for the people who are entitled to receive that entitlement. And by the government's own figures, which the Minister of Social Development announced in Parliament last week, about 14 million, of 13.4 million people in South Africa have zero income, and about 18 million live below the food poverty line. In other words, if their grant is extended to all those who qualify in terms of the amounts, then we're talking about between 14 and 18 million people. And this is what Treasury doesn't want to do. So they've imposed on DSD, the Department of Social Development, look, you've got to create obstacles which will lower the number of beneficiaries. And that's what they've done, but they've done it in such a convoluted and chaotic manner that they haven't themselves been able to roll out the grants.
Is it a sign then, Neil, that the basic income grant, which we know is an issue that's been kicked down the line or further down the road by another 12 months or so as per the State of the Nation this year and the budget, does all of this then mean the way this grant is being handled, that the BIC is seeming more and more unlikely, or there will be issues indeed, should the country move in that direction?
Not at all. In fact, the opposite, Tembekile. We must remember that the department was rolling out successfully every month grants to 10.5 million beneficiaries, adults, the SRD grant. That had happened. There were problems with it, but it was being done effectively. What this situation shows is not that there's a problem with the extension of basic income. It shows that the system of targeting, which is so discriminatory, so arbitrary, which requires poor people to prove their poverty, to provide ridiculous information, surveillance of their bank accounts, et cetera, that type of system is highly inefficient. And this is confirmed by the international evidence, which shows that means testing and targeting is a highly inefficient system. And that's why we and other civil society organizations are proposing that we rather go a universal route, that all this bureaucracy gets cut through, that it gets extended to every citizen as a right, and that you claw back through the tax system contributions from the more wealthy who can afford it. Being shown internationally through all the studies to be much more effective, much more equitable, and to go to the people who need it. Actually, the studies that have been done internationally show that up to 90% of the target population of the poor actually get excluded by means testing, because means testing never works. And I think if this situation shows anything, it's that we've got to move away from this arbitrary means testing system. But the results of the COVID grant, the SRD 350 grant, nobody disputes that it's been highly effective in staving off the most extreme forms of poverty and hunger. I mean, we only need to read the Sunday Times story a few weeks ago, which was talking about children eating sand to fill up their stomachs because they were so hungry, to know that millions of people in South Africa are on the brink of extreme hunger and even starvation.
Right.
And this is to withhold the grant for 2 months very well could have led to tipping a number of people both not only into destitution, but to make them extremely ill, and led to quite a number of deaths. So that's why I say those who are responsible for this must be held accountable. It's an extremely serious matter.
It's also happening within a context, Neil, where everyone in the country at the moment is complaining about the rising cost of living, right? And if the middle class and working class South Africans are saying they are unable to cope with the rising cost of food, fuel, electricity, what then for someone who has no income at all? How far can you stretch 350 rand?
Absolutely. And, there are very good organizations which monitor the prices of food. And, the grant itself should have increased at least at the level of inflation and probably above the level of inflation to deal with this. The national minimum wage should have been increased on an emergency basis to deal with these rising prices that people are confronting. So you're absolutely correct. And the latest, statistics from Stats SA show that unemployment continues to rise. We're now talking about not a crisis, we're talking about a catastrophe where over 12 million people are unemployed. And that is higher than the number that were receiving the grants. So the system has to be fixed. There's no doubt about it. I think those who cynically are trying to manipulate the situation, who are opposed to the grants, to say, well, this proves that the grants don't work, I think, that is a crass form of opportunism. The system must be fixed, and we determined as civil society to meet urgently with government, with the president in particular, to ways to resolve this crisis as soon as possible.
Neil Coleman, let's hope all goes well. Thank you very much for your time tonight.